How's it going, everyone? Happy Friday. Well, I'm back with another round of your regular scheduled Christmas carnage, and today I'm going to be talking about the 2012 Silent Night film, a loose remake of Silent Night, Deadly Night. Emphasis on loose because, right down to it, from what I've read, the screenwriter didn't even actually have any familiarity with the original franchise when he was tasked with writing a remake. And he took it more sort of loosely from a true crime story that he had read recently. And I think if you do approach this as a direct remake of Silent Night, Deadly Night, I don't think any fans of that movie would consider this a complete insult or an abomination or anything like that. I think that they would generally be pretty pleased. But I still feel like this is a film that stands well enough on its own. While this movie is not absolutely unheard of, I'm a little bit surprised that it doesn't seem to have more of a following at this point because I thought this was a wicked good time. It doesn't hurt that this was filmed in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I completed my film degree, so right on. Between this and Santa's Sleigh, Canada has definitely made some very proud contributions to the whole Killer Santa subgenre. But Silent Night has a tone that feels a little more in line with the Friday the 13th films or the Saw franchise in some cases, where it's not camp or goofy or spoof in any way, but there is just a general tone when it comes to the writing and direction of performances that sends the message that this is all essentially in good fun. You've got a good cast in this movie. Malcolm McDowell, even if he is just essentially being Malcolm McDowell in this, like this just kind of feels like an extension of the way that he was playing Loomis in Halloween 2. Malcolm McDowell could play an arrogant, condescending prick in his sleep at this point, although, to be fair, typecasting does kind of exist for a reason. The reason Joe Pesci played so many mean-spirited gangsters was because he could. So when you have someone like Malcolm McDowell that can fill a broadly sketched supporting role like this without having to think about it too much, from a filmmaking and writing perspective, it makes it a lot easier to just kind of like get down to the thrust of the story because you understand the kind of weight that he brings to this role and you know exactly what to expect from this guy. If he was the lead, it would be a different story. Then it might be a little bit more of an eye roller. But as it stands, he's perfectly fine playing a smug asshole in a small part like this. Donald Logue is also very good in his part as one of the Santas. Once again, you can always count on Donald Logue to chew the scenery if he's not given much else to do. But here, the scenery gnashing works, and he really seems to sync up well with the style of dialogue that's been written for this film, peppered with a lot of little smart-ass tongue-in-cheek undertone. He's very good at making that goofy dialogue feel very organic and natural. While sometimes I feel like his tendency to chew up the scenery can work against him, in a movie like this, that approach is quite welcome. Which brings me to Jamie King, who's really, really good here. I didn't really think that I would be able to accept her as a cop before I started watching this movie, but to my pleasant surprise, she does a very good job. She feels tough, but not like forcing it in any sort of obnoxious way. She's plucky, smart, grounded, and she inhabits this character much more naturally and confidently than I would have thought. And it makes me wonder why she hasn't gotten a shot at more leads like this in higher profile movies, because she is a surprisingly credible cop. In fact, I hate to say it because, once again, she's very, very good here, but she's almost a bit too grounded for her own good. It's weird because for most of the movie, as I mentioned, it has that sort of, confident, slightly tongue-in-cheek, without ever mugging it up, slasher tone going on. But then a lot of the times when we get to some of the dramatic moments with Jamie King's character Aubrey, it feels like the tone shifts and everything becomes much more grounded and truly grim and morose. And it's just kind of weird because it makes you feel like all of a sudden the movie is shifting tone and becoming super serial. And then it cuts back to guys like Malcolm McDowell and Donald Logue just gnashing up that scenery with two big, large salad bowl spoons in each hand. Or at least it sort of feels like that's what they're doing by comparison. And again, I don't want to make this sound like more of a sore on the viewing experience than it actually is, because I was never not enjoying this movie, but I couldn't help but feel like somehow the way that Jamie King chose to approach the character, as solid as her performance is, was maybe a bit sort of just tonally adrift from what the film was working for as a whole. I mean, just a little. And when you finally do get to the climax and she takes on the killer Santa one-on-one, that's where I think she finally starts to kind of like just have fun and let it all hang out and let herself ham it up just a touch. I mean, not to the point where it's muggy or she's winking at the camera, but she kind of plays it up a little bit more, and that's when it finally feels like she's finding her stride with the rest of the film. On the whole, though, I never stopped caring about her character, and she was always rootable, so all things considered, that's a small complaint. Director Stephen C. Miller also really impresses me here with what he was able to do with a relatively modest budget. The cinematography is surprisingly solid here. There's lots of really good use of light and shadow, a lot of good use of high contrast to create mood. The action and the gore are always choreographed in such a way that everything feels fluid and easy to follow without feeling over choreographed. Miller always finds just the right amount of gore or the aftermath of violence to show in a scene just to punctuate the action. This movie probably would feel pretty hard-edged to a general audience, but if you're a seasoned horror fan, there's nothing here that's going to make you grimace. It's always the perfect amount to give all the deaths punch. There's also one kill near the end that I will tread carefully on so as not to spoil anything, but it involves a character who dies in a way that is more cinematic than violent, but still really effective. And it was pretty cool because I wasn't used to that kind of an ending. And it's shot in an overhead way that makes it look elegant and artistic without being pretentious. And it just looks great. Like, I mean, there is some real effort being put into the cinematography here, when really all they probably had to do was film it competently and it would have been passable and perfectly serviceable to a story like this. But that little bit of extra effort and flair, always tastefully done, makes this feel a little bit more distinct and gives it its own sort of unique stylistic flavor. On the debit side, sometimes I think they do overuse CGI rain and snow a little bit. Granted, this was 10 years ago, okay, and we all know how fast that technology advances, so anything like that is probably bound to seem a little bit dated, but, you know, minor nitpick. And the movie also does have a lot of fun with some of the red herrings that pop up in terms of who could actually be the killer Santa. Even if it doesn't quite pay off the way you think it's going to, I will say that it does make for some interesting interactions between Jamie King's character and those others as she's investigating them. And speaking of killers, I will just say, without spoiling the actual moment, that this movie has the single best use of that old come on line, "Ready when you are, killer," that I have seen in pretty much any movie that I can think of. In fact, the whole script is peppered with little one-liners like that kind of sometimes lead into a moment of violence or some sort of surprise. And it's always just right. Even if the joke itself is in some cases maybe just teetering on dad joke territory, the way that it sets up the entrance for the Santa killer in a couple of cases does make for some good timing. Even the opening scene with the killer. Again, I know this is an older movie, so I don't have much to lose by just spoiling it, but I will just say that if you watch this and you haven't seen it before, just pay attention to the dialogue in that opening scene. And near the end, there's a line that I thought was very well written, kind of a light laugh when you didn't expect it. And it's a sort of thing that I have to marvel at not having seen in more movies. In fact, this whole movie, with the exception of some elements of Jamie King's performance, pretty much rides the line between horror and horror comedy perfectly. I would say if you happen to catch the Joe Begos film Christmas Bloody Christmas that came out last winter, and you enjoyed that, and for some reason you haven't seen Silent Night 2012, check this one out. It's not quite as sort of self-aware or tongue-in-cheek as Christmas Bloody Christmas, but it's in the same ballpark. And if you like that one, I think that you'll enjoy this too. The two of them would pair for an evening perfectly. It really does genuinely flabbergast me a little bit that this movie is not a more popular Christmas horror favorite amongst fans, especially when it's this well made. As I said before, you probably could have gone about the production of the film in a much more rudimentary way, but they took the time to season everything with a very individual and earnest sense of artistry that just gives the whole thing a really big boost. So if you're combing through Tubi looking for something new to add to your Christmas horror rotation, I highly recommend Silent Night 2012. It's an absolute blast, even if there's one or two little things that could be tweaked and refined just a little bit. This is still a movie that is, in terms of its production and overall effort, light years beyond what I was expecting. That was such a pleasant surprise. I'm so glad that I did finally dig up one in the batch there that I can actually feel genuinely happy and satisfied and excited to talk about. And if you're someone who is aware of it but maybe is on the fence or just haven't quite gotten around to it for one reason or another, you are in very good hands with this one, trust me. Once again, everyone, happy Friday. Thanks for watching. Hope you're all having a great evening. Enjoy your weekend and look for more Christmas horror content coming your way really soon.